It's episode 42 of Red versus Blue. My name is Mike Stark.
And I'm Keith Curry.
Less than 3 weeks to go until the election. It's been a week of media, basically, right?
This was the week that Kamala Harris was going to do her big media blitz to respond to the charges that she's not talking to the media, not taking questions. She appeared on 60 Minutes, a special program that aired on Monday. Bill Whitaker. Bill asked good questions, sort of heavily edited. She did it. She went on The View. She went on Howard Stern. She went on a program called All the Smoke, which is apparently about marijuana, which she called weed, which they noted to be very old school instead of calling it cannabis. She went on Call Her Daddy, which is a odd title for a female-oriented podcast. And she went on Stephen Colbert. So she's been making the rounds, trying to talk to voters. In the meantime, Donald Trump announced that tomorrow he's going to appear in Coachella. I don't think they've told him he's not appearing at the music festival site. In reading the stories about why is Trump going to Riverside County in California, where he's trailing in the polls by 20 points, most people have said, well, it's Arizona adjacent and there's more Hispanics there. Oh. So that's what I think what he's trying to do is for the images of it. He's also announced he's going to do a rally in Madison Square Garden in New York, which is, again, an odd location for him.
These are not places where he has a chance of winning either, right?
No, he's actually running better in the polls in New York, but he's not going to win New York. He's going to still lose New York by 1 million votes or more.
So what's the strategy here? As a political strategist, shouldn't you be working those battleground states?
Yes, but his strategy is to hold up, in his view, a mirror to everything that's wrong with America. So he was in Detroit this week speaking to the Detroit Economic Club, bashing the city of Detroit. He'll be in Coachella, and no doubt he will bash Gavin Newsom in California and Kamala Harris' liberalism and rampant crime.
Gotcha.
He'll be in New York. And he actually has a lot in common with the mayor in New York. I don't know. And he'll talk about how great he was here and how rotten the city is because of the Democrats. And I think that's his game plan to do that. Is it a successful game plan? Is it one that's going to work? I'd be very doubtful about it. Given how close the swing states are, I would invest my narrow resources there. But nonetheless, that's what he has decided to do.
Now, I've heard nothing but criticism about Kamala Harris's interviews. I watched most of them. I didn't watch them all because there was a lot of them. Was a lot of them. And I didn't find them horrible. I found them very politician-like. She did have some things that she covered, the economics and all of that. Whether you agree with it or not is another issue, but I think she covered it. Yet I hear the right-wing pundits say how it was word salad, there was nothing going on, all while having blinders on to everything that Donald Trump says at any speech he makes.
Trump wants to take CBS off the air for how they handled the interviews and presentations. But it's more than the right-wing media who have been critical. To her credit, she was very strong on Ukraine and very unequivocal there. She's trying to walk a tight line on Israel, and she may or may not have accomplished that. But she's yet to make the sale on economics. Here is the problem facing Harris, is that she has not been clear on taxes. For example, part of the Trump tax cut was a rollback of the AMT tax to much higher levels. Those are going to fall back again. Is she going to support the AMT reforms? Because a lot of people who are making a lot less than $400,000 paid the alternative minimum tax. Same with payroll taxes. She's going to raise payroll taxes to pay for Social Security. Those affect everybody who's working. What about the inheritance tax? The inheritance tax exemption is currently $13 million in 2026. Unless the Trump tax bill is extended, it will roll back to $6 million. So, by the way, let's just stop here, because if you're listening to this podcast and you're a 30 or 40-year-old and you're struggling financially and you're ready to vote for Harris because you want to stick it to the man and stick it to all those rich people, just know that the biggest generational wealth transfer in history will be when your baby boomer parents die and you inherit millions of dollars. And under the current plan, Kamala Harris is going to take several of those millions from you. Those are the things that are giving American people pause. The American people definitively do not want a continuation of Bidenomics, or whatever you want to call it. It's really Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders economics. They thought they voted against that when they nominated Biden, but with Biden, they got more Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren economics. And when given the chance to say, where do you differentiate yourself with Joe Biden, she couldn't think of an answer. Finally said, well, I'll put a Republican in the cabinet. He didn't do that. And that's her problem. She's got to be reassuring to middle-class voters and working-class voters, because this affects more than people who believe they're well off. Sure. This affects a lot of people who understand the paycheck economics of what happened in 2017 and what's happening now.
And I guess that no matter what Trump says, the people that support him look back at his 4 years and say, I was better off then. No matter what he says now and what sort of word salad comes out of his mouth about tariffs and his economic plan, which is always muddled and everything, it doesn't matter what he says, right?
No, Trump's plan is utterly economically incoherent, except that it's incoherent biasing to cutting taxes. For example, this week he came out and said he wants to bring back the exemption on auto loan interest, which I think was repealed in the Reagan 1986 Tax Act. He wants to bring back the SALT cap, which was the way that they paid for the Trump tax cuts, was putting this cap on state and local taxes. So he's for cutting every tax and having no taxes, and it's utterly economically irresponsible and incoherent. But because he's cutting taxes rather than raising taxes, people are giving him a pass.
That gives him some traction then, right?
It does.
Okay. Polls are close. Where do we stand now, 3 weeks out?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, you've had Bruce Springsteen and Taylor Swift come out for Harris. You've had Howard Stern do, I think, a fairly complimentary interview. There's a movie coming out, The Apprentice, that I think opens today, will be non-complimentary. Trump came out and condemned Howard Stern for the interview. He called him a beta male. Now, you and I both have listened to enough Howard Stern to know that all of that's going to do is create an hour and 45-minute episode where he does nothing but excoriate Donald Trump. So if you've got Howard Stern and Taylor Swift and Bruce Springsteen and the movies arrayed against you, that's a pretty strong cultural hill to have to climb. Now, he's probably going to do it because a lot of the Trump voters couldn't pick Bruce Springsteen out of a lineup.
Right.
But nonetheless, that's what's working for Harris. Now, her polls have her up about 2 points nationally. That's good for her, except that at this point, Biden was up by 9 points in the campaign. So is this a cause of concern or not? There are some factors that are different. One is Trump is running stronger in New York and stronger by 13 points in Florida. So just like Biden had wasted votes in California, Trump now has more wasted votes than he had before. So that means that the differential is perhaps not as worrisome to Harris as one might think it is. But if you look at the Real Clear Politics average of polls, Trump is up by 0.3 in Pennsylvania, 0.7 in Michigan, 0.6 in North Carolina, and Harris is up 0.4 in Wisconsin. So despite all of the great media, despite the 60 Minutes, despite the fact that she has raised $1 billion since she's gotten this race and is running a campaign that is not constrained by resources, Trump is continuing to make slight incremental gains. And for the first time, Republicans are leading in party identification nationally, 42 to 40%. When I started in politics in the 1970s and Southerners were Democrats, blacks were strongly Democrats, you would never have thought the Republicans would ever get close to this, but yet they have. So somehow, somewhere, she's not connecting with voters and things are slipping away for her.
So what does she need to do to win?
She needs to be clear on taxes, on the AMT, payroll taxes, inheritance taxes, SALT, to get her there. She needs to talk to Liz Cheney and take Liz Cheney's advice on what to say and just say it. And she's done a good job. She's getting credit for this, of moving away from identity politics. She's running a campaign of stability, unity, and competence. That's good, but she's got to link it with some policy goals. She's got to disavow the squad. They're running ads now tying her to the squad, Sanders and Warren. She needs a sister soldier moment where she stands up to somebody on the left and whacks them down so that people say, okay, she's not a conventional leftist.
Right.
I ran into a very well-respected woman in town at the post office yesterday who I hadn't seen in a while. And she comes up and goes, well, isn't it awful? Do you think we're going to survive? And I said, well, it's going to be a tight election. I didn't know whether she was for Trump or Harris, but it ends up, if she gets elected, we're going to go communist. I just can't believe it. Our country will be gone. And millions of people believe that. And she has got to, somehow dispel that image because Trump is running good campaign ads. I mean, he's tying her to the squad. He's tying her to the trans thing. That's some people consider that to be the Willie Horton of this campaign, where she's speaking about fighting for the right of a California prisoner to have a tax-funded sex change operation in prison. And she did it for, to advance the cause and the movement.
Right.
Well, that just defines her as the kind of person a lot of Americans don't want to have in the White House. And so she's got to find a way to differentiate herself. Now, the other thing she's got to do is not get caught in the democracy thing. The biggest argument the Democrats have is that Trump is a threat to democracy. But yet, when they come out this week and say, we want to pack the Supreme Court, we want to do away with the Electoral College, we want statehood for D.C., and God knows what else, everybody looks at that and says, okay, well, you're just, attack on democracy in a different flavor.
Right.
And it takes away the moral clarity that they have in their argument. They need to move away from that. Now, she's excelled in political execution. She's raised $1 billion. She has a great ground game and get out the vote. In Pennsylvania, there are 400 staff and 50 offices for the Harris campaign. I'm not even sure there's 50 counties in Pennsylvania, but they've got the infrastructure and the resources to defeat the Republicans on the ground game. Interesting note, of the early vote in Pennsylvania, 960,000 Democrats have voted, 430,000 Republicans have voted. So they are executing once again much better than the Republicans. However, the Republicans are getting out more votes than they got in 2022. So they are beginning to catch up. Right. In Orange County tomorrow, there is a bring your ballot to the headquarters and turn it in to get early voting for Republicans. And the vote in Orange County, by the way, for the very first day when ballots can be returned, 185 Democrats versus 49 Republicans. So Trump has shot himself in the foot by his attacks on early voting, which they now have to do in North Carolina and Georgia because of hurricane damage in Florida. Yeah. So she's got to continue to execute and get that done.
We want to talk for a second now about the Senate races and get an update on that. Now, you had texted me that there's going to be a debate tonight. This was a couple nights ago between Adam Schiff and Steve Garvey.
And there was.
And I find it ironic that it was going on during the Dodger playoff game.
Yeah, that's Steve has not been a lucky candidate in this election, and he will not be a lucky candidate on election night, unfortunately. But,
yeah, I watched a little bit of it. He was floundering a little bit, wouldn't you say?
Well, he's out of his element. They were throwing him softballs too. He should have been able to hit a few out of the park, but he is who he is, and it is the race that it is.
What about other Senate races?
The big news is that the Republican candidate in Montana is now 7 points ahead of Tester. And that pretty much is going to nail him down. And that means Republicans are going to have 51 Senate seats at a minimum. There are other seats that are winnable for Republicans in Ohio and Michigan and Wisconsin, and a real reach in Maryland and Pennsylvania. Those seats the Democrats are still ahead, but only by single digits. Where the Democrats have an opportunity is perhaps in Florida with Rick Scott, although Rick Scott, the Florida Republican registration is much, much higher than it used to be. So he's probably safe. For whatever reason, there's an independent candidate running against Deb Fisher in Nebraska who's doing very well. And she could be in trouble, but it's very hard to win as an independent. And then in Texas, where Ted Cruz is 4 points up against Congressman Allard, bright young guy who's running a good campaign. Texas is a hard state for a black Democrat to win in a presidential year. But I am reminded of what Al Franken had to say about Ted Cruz. He says, of all the senators in the Senate, I like Ted Cruz the best. And I hate Ted Cruz. So he is a guy who doesn't have a lot of friends, and it's beginning to show a little bit. He won by 3 points against Beto O'Rourke in the last election. But that's a bank shot for the Democrats to try and win one back. So I think the Republicans will end up certainly with 50, probably with 51, and maybe 52 or 3.
Great analysis, as always, Keith. So what do we got going this week that we're going to talk about next week?
Well, we'll have a chance to short out the hurricane response a little bit and see how that is playing out. We'll have Donald Trump and Coachella. So, pull up your cigarette lighters and, watch the show. It should be fun. I think everybody's now looking for people to see, who is going to make a big mistake.
Right.
I think Trump has sort of immuted everybody to his gaffes. I mean, they are going to be what they're going to be. You have the new Bob Woodward book coming out where he sent COVID testing machines to Putin. and has private conversations with Putin. That's what the Harris campaign needs to do, is they need to tie Putin to Trump and really make him look like the Putin lackey that he sort of is. And they haven't done that. And Trump needs to obviously avoid that. And he's not been very good at doing that. Trump needs to keep his mouth shut on the campaign and talk about inflation and taxes and jobs and not be nuts, which is a challenge for him. So we'll see if he's up for it.
There you go. Now, before we go, we did a short review last week of the new Apprentice movie. Neither one of us have seen it, although there are clips everywhere online. They're really blanketing the YouTube, especially with clips from it. But I found it very interesting that Roger Stone chimed in and said that the portrayal of Ray Cohn was spot on. So that's not going to sit too well with Trump, I don't think.
Well, more so than his father, Roy Cohn was Trump's mentor. He taught him everything he knew about business, and it shows. So I think that the depiction of Roy Cohn is going to be very informative about how Trump himself was formed in terms of his approach to things. People ask, why does he do these crazy things of just standing up and asserting lies over and over and over again? And I think it's because Roy Cohn told him to do that. Yeah. And he's learned that, and that's what he does. And in some cases, it's worked for him.
Well, we'll see how the reviews are of this film when it comes out. I gave it a bad review, but I haven't seen it, so we'll see what happens. But as you pointed out, it doesn't matter if it's a good film or not. It's out there, and that people are going to see it, and they're going to judge one way or the other. Okay, next week it'll be 2 weeks till the election, and we will have more information about what's going on. We appreciate you listening to this podcast. We don't know if we're going to do this after the election. We just might. We'll see how things play out. But we appreciate you listening. Like us on Facebook. Give us a good review on iTunes and Spotify. And we will join you next week with another edition of Red versus Blue.
Bye, everybody. Take care.